You're listening to Expat Radio, your worldwide friend.
Good morning, world. Welcome to The Heartbeat with me, Christine Saunders, and my amazing guest, Stefanos. It's really early in the morning here, so I'm very, very excited for everyone to meet him today. Dave, it's not snowing here today.
Lovely. Well, I've actually got my shallots on, or are they called culottes? It was one of the two. I couldn't remember what they're called. I've put the wrong thing on my feet. I know that much.
Yeah, last 2 weeks it's been snowing here, so it's not. It's actually raining, but that's okay.
I've got my bobble hat and goggles on here, ready, just in case.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, welcome to The Heartbeat. I'm excited for my guest today. I have been following Stefanos for a long time, probably over a year and a half now, and I'm excited he has agreed to share space with me today. And there's so many topics we could talk about today. Like, I have a long list, and we're not going to get to any of them, all of them.
Can I say hello to him? Can I say hello to him? Because you're keeping him to yourself at the moment, aren't you?
I am. I'm totally hoarding on him. Yeah. No,
Morning,
yes,
pal.
we say hello, of
Morning,
course.
pal. How are you?
I'm well, Dave. Yourself?
Very well, very well. I'm just...
Excellent.
I'm going to have to take these goggles and bobble hat off very shortly and my shallots off my trousers, but yeah.
I don't know what those things are, but they sound kind of funny.
You don't want to know?
I don't really want to know. So I will let Stefanos introduce himself in a really quick second. But here's some of the topics that kind of just came to mind as I was brainstorming this morning, popping out of bed. There was sexual intimacy, reclaiming your kingdom, human connection, mental health with men, vulnerability, fear, opportunities, higher power. There's so many topics that we could talk about. But I want people to know you and to know what work you're doing, because it's really fantastic. So with that, would you briefly introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So very, very honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It seems that we're raining in from all over the world, which is cool. So essentially, I work with men on the subject and the application and the presence of masculinity in the world. So what does masculinity mean in contemporary times, and how can we all benefit as a society and as a planet Earth from men being more grounded in their masculinity or in a deeper sense of their own selves? In conjunction with that, I focus very deeply on relationships and improving and evolving and enhancing the quality of our relationships, and whether that be our relationship to an idea, to our purpose or purposes, to our why, which is one and the same, to our relationships to our belief systems, to our models of reality, to other people, to our intimate lovers, to our romantic partners, to our beloveds, to our families. And really, how do we enhance the quality and the connection, the intimacy and the growth and the expansion that can take place in those relationships? And so working on that, or being in that space, is deeply, deeply rewarding for me, and it's something that I commit my life to.
That is beautiful. And I think when I first started following you, you still lived in Australia, and you have recently made a giant move, and maybe later on in our conversation we can talk a little bit about that. But you are originally from Australia?
Yes. I was born in Perth, Western Australia, and then was raised for a number of years in Greece, and then came back to Australia, and then would go back and forth. And so I grew up in Australia and Greece.
Wow. And so I know you have a story, and I want to get to your story at some point in time and how you've got to where you are today. What essentially brought you to the U.S.?
My beautiful fiancée brought me to the US. So she's an American citizen, and so we decided to live here and be here, at least based here at a core with a greater intention for the next few years. America's an amazing place, and there's deep opportunity here, and it feels right to be here for many reasons. But we travel a lot as well. We'll be in Europe in the next couple of weeks as well. We'll be there towards the end of the year. We'll be in Australia towards the end of the year, and Indonesia as well. And so we travel a great deal.
That's fantastic. And hey, Dave, can you help us out? Can you tell us some of the countries that are listening today?
Thailand, for a start, because I had some nutter ringing me up at the middle of the morning, asking to play certain songs. I think it was the noodle rap that they wanted, but, you know, it scares me to death, some of these people that get it. Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Brunei. Where else have we got? We've got Moscow. We've got the Russian Federation. We've got Portugal, China. China's tuned in at the moment.
Nice.
There's just over 85,000 tuned in at the moment.
Fantastic. Great. That's awesome. So we are definitely going global this morning, and I'm excited for us to continue talking and sharing your message. Let's take a really quick break, and then after that, we're going to come back and, you know, just have a conversation, and maybe I can ask you some questions about some of these topics that we kind of ran through. I want to hear about your story. So let's listen to Bryan Adams' Shine a Light, my new favorite song, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Expat Radio, your worldwide friend.
Yes, thank you, Dave, for steering my ship today. I really appreciate that.
I know that's the only song I know about a bloke carrying a torch. I'm trying to think of different songs but related to that, and there isn't one.
Oh my gosh, that's a fantastic song. Like I'm a Bryan Adams fan. We've had this conversation before. So when you tell me that that's my first song, it just makes my whole entire show go much better.
The other thing I've just got to tell you quickly about Stefanos, I was DJing out in Greece in the early 90s. I was in Felleraki. Oh yeah, I was at Felleraki in Rhodes, and then I was on the mainland.
That's a nice place.
Yeah, it was. We caused chaos near Lindos.
No, British don't cause any chaos on the Greek islands, do they?
I did. Trust me. I had to get out quick.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I don't even want to know. That's a whole other show. So, welcome back to The Heartbeat with my friend Stefanos today. And what I really want to sort of open this next section with is, you know, like I said in the beginning, I have been following you because I feel when I listen to some of your lives and when I listen to some of your videos, there's this calming sense, and like I was drawn in. And then there's also this powerfulness in your voice that I thought, oh, I dig this guy. And I think the first time I followed you, like it was like, nope, sorry, Facebook says I have too many friends kind of thing. But then I got to follow you, and so it's been awesome to be able to see you and hear you and your message. And so I'm wondering if you can sort of share your story, as you know, in as much detail as you would like, about how you became where you are today versus like growing up and all those sorts of things.
Dr. John Demartini tells us that our voids often become our values. And so for me, I grew up feeling very isolated, feeling very disconnected, feeling alone, feeling not heard, not seen, not appreciated, not understood in any capacity, and feeling very scared during my formative years. I grew up in a violent household, physically violent, emotionally abusive. And for me, that was the norm. And that's what I thought was normal, because I witnessed that as well in any friends that I did have in so many of their parents too, and their dynamic. And that was very difficult as a child. And so just want to fast track and I'll come back. Mm-hmm. But now as an adult, being in the world and moving in the world and serving in the world and having greater levels of awareness, really I thrive on connection and connectedness and intimacy into being able to see people for who they truly are, with little to no critical judgment around their behaviour, who they are, how they show up, and of course having that reciprocated and cultivating those forms of relationships in my life. And that's really what's driven me with the voids that I experienced as a child in that space. Mm-hmm. Really just not being seen at all, not having a voice Something that's very important to me is to be a voice for the voiceless. That's everything to me in terms of how I move through the world and the action that I take and what underpins that action. And so that growing up in that volatility, it really formed much of how I spent my life as a teenager and as an adult. I was very passive and withdrawn, very withdrawn from the world, and very, very shy to be me. I wore many different masks, as many men can relate to this, but it's not just men, it's everyone. Or most of us, I don't want a blanket statement say everyone, but so many of us experience either trauma or pain in our upbringing, that we carry that unconsciously and unknowingly into our adult lives. And so that also drove me to really understand people. So I went into university and all degrees in psychology, behavioural science, philosophy, and master's degree and so forth. And I kept growing in that space. But that passivity turned to such deep frustration that as a teenager, instead of being bullied, I almost became the bully. I outlashed into the world. I became what my father was in so many ways. I was angry. I was fighting all the time, hitting the streets and fighting, and just being a menace and being very unhealthy and extreme in my behaviour, and for lack of a better term, being hyper masculine. And I carried that on in my adulthood and in my relationships. I was never physically violent in my relationships. However, I was emotionally abusive. I was distant. I was non-committal. I really ignored very much what my needs were authentically and the needs of my partners. I was dismissive in my behaviour as well, in my posturing. And I just wasn't present. And I found that I was unfaithful in my relationships as well, completely disconnected from the relationship and disrespectful in so many ways. And at the same time, I cared so deeply, and this was a byproduct later on I understood once I decided to go deep into my own pain and really face it and be committed fully to that and take ownership and responsibility for where I was showing up and how I was showing up. I realised that a lot of my behaviour was I was avoiding and isolating myself and just avoiding the fear and the trauma that I'd experienced, and it was really driving much of my behaviour from a place of fear.
That's crazy. I feel like we may have lost. Oh, no, there you are. I think. Okay, we lost you for a quick second.
Oh.
It's all good. You're back. So yeah, you were talking about a place of fear.
Yeah, and so coming from that fear, it drove me to really experience what I was experiencing as a child, which was isolation, judgment, having to hide and wear masks. I lived in my shadow self. And so in psychology, we call this the shadow self, the parts of us that we avoid, that we shun, that we don't appreciate, that we think and perceive that society will also abandon. And so we abandon these parts within us, which really fragments and fractures our psyche and our relationships and the way we relate. And so it wasn't until a number of years ago that I was in an intimate relationship, and the woman that I was with at that time discovered my behaviour and my actions, and observing that pain in her, witnessing her suffering, and that my actions were a big part of that, and me being out of integrity and coming from fear and not having the courage to really speak my truth. It was a mass. I felt like I got hit with a planet, and so in that time, I made a decision to go deep, and really, really go deep into and committed to understanding, knowing, feeling, and moving through these traumas and these pains and these deep agitations and frustrations and anger, the rage that I had within me as a man in this world. And so I committed to that path, and I said to myself, if I commit suicide, if I end up in a mental asylum, or the other option, which is where I am today, is that I come through that with such deep revealing in my own self and revelation and deeper understanding that I can also impart some wisdom and knowledge around this journey, particularly for men. But men's issues and men's problems, quote unquote, aren't just men's alone. We live in a
Right.
world where we interact with each other, irrespective of whether you're gender fluid or you have an understanding of binary gender, which is just male and female. Irrespective if you're a sentient being, you're impacting your beingness in the world, the way you show up is impacting everyone. And I realize that. And it's not an egoic thing here. It's not coming from a place of vanity. It's coming from a place of connectedness, deeply realizing that our stuff affects other people and it affects society, and there's a ripple effect to that. And so I really committed to that path, irrespective of any outcome, and I was more committed and focused on the unraveling itself, which comes with great pain, of course. It's very confronting, because what unravels itself is, again, quote unquote, all the ugly parts of ourselves, which are very difficult for the ego to face. And so my ego really struggled with that, and I had multiple ego deaths. I was on the verge of suicide, contemplated suicide because of this unraveling that was taking place. That it was the embarrassment, the shame, the guilt, the deep, profound guilt, the remorse, the suffering around grieving who I was and who I wasn't, grieving the not having the love of my father and not having a solid family unit, a safe family unit. So there's a lot that unravels and that unravels when we decide to really look at our stuff as human beings. And that's why so many of us don't.
Right.
Because it's too painful.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and that's something I want to definitely talk about a little bit later, is that mindset and that space that you created to do that. So let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we can dive into that a little bit more. And we're going to go and listen to Ed Sheeran, Perfect, and we'll be right back. I absolutely love that song. Welcome back to The Heartbeat, everyone, with Christine Saunders and my special guest, Stefanos, today. And we are going to keep chatting. We have a lot that I want to talk about, but we only have a half an hour left. So I want to dive into mindset, if you want to call it that, or that moment when you're like, I need to make some changes, and you make that decision. And what's your first step? It's a big question, right?
Yeah, it's a decision. And so the first step comes from choosing. And what underpins the choice is this deep, visceral knowing that remaining the same and the regret of remaining the same and the moment-to-moment pain that's suppressed, that we still feel and bubbles to the surface more and more frequently the more we suppress it, is more painful than the journey of facing our true selves. And so that is the first step, is really embracing that truth, because that is a truth. And so many of us are suffering silently. We need to end that. And part of how we end it is sharing each other's stories. Is sharing our own story and knowing that we're not alone, and demonstrating that we have. There's so many. I mean, I learn every day from all the people that I work with, and also what I witness in the world of people, courageous people sharing their stories and coming through that because they made a choice and they were committed to that path of truth, essentially. I mean, I was living in lies, so many lies about myself, about who I was in the world, hiding behind so many masks. And so we have to make a decision to want to be seen. It's a scary thing to be seen, especially if you're very well versed and practiced in not being seen. And I was a master at that, and so many of us are, because we leverage these coping strategies as children and during our formative years that help us navigate our environment, relationships, people, discomfort, painful experiences. And we generally bring these coping strategies as compensatory or coping mechanisms in our adult lives. And that's what I was doing. And we do this unbeknown to our own selves. These are unconscious patterns of behavior that really drive and direct what we choose to engage in, what we like, what we dislike, who we spend our time with, how we argue, how we experience pain, how we become offended, how we offend others, that and so much more. And so when these coping strategies that no longer have a place in our adult relationships take over us, we're almost running on autopilot. It's interesting, this concept of free will. How free are we if we're being triggered by our environment and then we have an automated response that's on default because that's the core of who we are, which we can change. We're realizing through neuroscience more and more every day that we're very malleable and we can change literally our personalities. However, we're so entrenched in these patterns and repeating these patterns, unless we bring awareness to these patterns, then we're losing in life. And so you ask, what some of the first steps are. Another one is awareness itself, just being mindful and aware of what are the patterns in my life, where am I suffering, and what are the patterns and the occurrings that are unraveling that are similar in every situation. And so awareness can be both curative and preventative. And it is. It's both curative and preventative. And so awareness plays a massive role in shifting our behavior.
Right. So let me ask you this quick question, because I believe that, we all have rules around how we get our needs met, right? And some of those rules, like you just stated, form when we're very, very young or through experiences that we've had maybe one time in our life. And they serve us in that moment. And then, 10 years later, they no longer serve us, but they've become so habitual that sometimes we can't get out of it. So we have to look to see if those rules and our beliefs and our values are still serving us. And I think for some of my clients that I chat with and we talk about rules and values, and they're like, well, you can't change my values. And I was like, well, you should change your values. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that we can change our values, and reevaluating our values on a regular basis is important. And additionally to that is, whose values are they really? For so many years, I lived the values of society, of my dominant or prominent peer groups, of my familial values and cultural values. And whilst I still hold some of those dear to me today, I was living most of them, or really all of them probably, with no awareness. And so what I thought was mine and what was important to me, my model of reality, what drove me, I wasn't really even interested in. It didn't really pique me. I just took it on because what I thought, that's what everyone else is doing. And that's the pressure of our peer groups at times, no matter what they are. And so being discerning, and discernment is the realm of the masculine. And just to be very clear on a side note, masculine, feminine expression resides in every sentient being. Just think two sides of the same coin. It's a polarity. You can't be in the world without the other. We live in a reality of duality, in a realm of opposites, just on a side note. And so this thing around values is, you've got to get very clear on, are these the values I want to live by, and are they mine? Are they really mine? And what I mean by that is, do you take ownership of them? Do you align with them deeply? Because it's not about, did you create a new set of values that no one's ever heard of? Impossible. Everything that we do has been done before to some extent, in some expression or variation. I'm speaking to, do you own those values, and do they deeply align with you authentically and truthfully? That's the key there. Right.
And I think, along those lines is, the term that we all hear a lot, and it's really important for me, is that vulnerability. And I think for me, I think when we spoke about, you coming on the show, is I have this calling to bring empowering men who can show and be okay with vulnerability, and you do that. And so can we talk a little bit about vulnerability in men? I know that's a huge topic and we don't have a whole lot of time.
Of course we
can. But
can.
I would love to talk about that.
Of course. So let's touch on that, and you'll tell me when to stop. And so here's the thing with vulnerability. It's more prevalent in our world than we think. And so Brené Brown, who is a prominent thought leader in this space, she'll speak to elements of vulnerability. In other words, what parameters define vulnerability? So one of them is experiencing emotional volatility. The other is that it must involve an element of risk. And there must involve an element of the unknown. And when you have those three parameters, you're generally experiencing, and you're engaged in that, you're generally experiencing vulnerability. So I've done a great deal, as Brené Brown has, I've done a great deal of work with elite special forces soldiers. Our friend Dave would know the SAS is in the British military or the Commonwealth military. We call our Special Forces soldiers. One of the groups are called the SAS. And so the work that I've done with them, it exposes them. When they're in operation, there's high elements of risk. There's high elements of unknown. Generally, there's the environment will elicit them to experience emotional volatility, but of course through training they are able to remain calmer. But the environment is a highly volatile environment, generally speaking. And so if you look at that, you think, well, they have to be vulnerable, and they do. They have to communicate from a place of truth. They have to be coherent and clear in their communication with their fellow soldiers. And so we find that, even the quote-unquote toughest of guys are and do experience vulnerability. Vulnerability is bonding. Vulnerability is being courageous. There's tremendous courage involved in having to be vulnerable, because essentially we're showing at the world, this is who I am in my purest, rawest, most authentic form. Can you take me for that? So if you're a man and you're in an intimate relationship with a woman, for example, and I'll use a heterosexual normative example because it's easier per se. And you're speaking to some of your greatest fears. That involves so much vulnerability. Now, our greatest fear as human beings is abandonment, rejection, humiliation, particularly for men. They're three core woundings. And so for a man to step into that and take that risk, and there's unknown in how she may respond and the emotional influx that he's feeling, that is massive, massive. And that's massive for anyone to do that, because you're basically saying, this is me. Can you see me for who I am without judgment? Can you honor me without critique and without isolating me and not seeing me for who I truly am? And so this is one of humanity's greatest fears. This is primal. This is neurologically inbuilt in us. It's in our brainstem. It's in our reptilian brain, in our R-complex brain, if we look at the three-brain triune system. But this is embedded in the oldest parts of who we are, because in the old days when we were evolving, we evolved in group and tribe, and there was safety in numbers. And if you were kicked out of your in-group, for whatever reason, back then it was less complex than it probably is now, than it would be now, because our social structures and systems are more complex now. There's deeper layers to our culture, and there's many reasons for that. You were dead. Your environment was volatile. You're on your own. You're pretty much dead. And so that triggers that, because if you say something, that's why public speaking is so painful, because if you say something in front of a crowd of people, and your body knows this unconsciously, the body knows, that is completely against what the majority of those people agree with, there's a risk that you're out of that in-group now. You're a part of the out-group. That means you're alone, you're isolated, you're rejected, you're abandoned, you're humiliated. Wow, like that's a cocktail of pain. And so being vulnerable, it's easier to not be vulnerable. It's easier to wear a mask, because the ego says, well, that's my fake persona, that's my fake self. I'm not really being hurt because it's not really us. So let's just do that and appease others. And if we get hurt, it doesn't matter. And that's the complexity of the brain and the brain in relationship to society, to social unraveling or social structure. And so vulnerability, though, becomes important, because vulnerability is safe. Because when you're open with someone, you give them permission to be open, and you have this beautiful sharing and intimacy and bonding. Into me you see, into me I see. And that there's everything in humanity these days. In a world of cultural clutter, in a world of hyper tech and social media and this culture of working in small cubicles, and your car's a small cubicle, your train's a small cubicle, your office is a small cubicle, and I'm obviously generalizing here. And this sense of isolation that we have, we're craving intimacy and deep connection. And therefore, this ability to be vulnerable stimulates that, and it tells people that you're safe, because you'll become predictable, because you're real. There's no lies. It's just, this is who I am. You can rely on me showing up in this way, and I'm not attached to that outcome. And that's a difficult place to be, to not be attached to possibly being hurt. I mean, it's a big ask for most people, and that's why most of us are not vulnerable. That's why we hide behind the shadow self or masks, or what we think people want, and we appease others, and we become codependent, and we minimize ourselves and maximize others, and that's part of the issue there.
Right. I think, that's a lot to take in, and I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I think the one thing, and I'm going to ask this question for you to think about when we come back from a quick break, but the question when we come back is, so we need to have these spaces to be vulnerable, not just for men, but for everyone. And and how would you, if I were, wanting to work with you or working with you as a woman, how would you help me create space for in my relationships for that type of thing? So think about that when we come back. After Emma Button, Baby Please Don't Stop, we'll answer that question. We'll be right back.
Great.
You're listening to Expat Radio, your worldwide friend.
Welcome back to The Heartbeat. Welcome, world. My name's Christine Saunders, and I'm here with my special guest, Stefanos. And we are going to keep going on our conversation. We have about 10 minutes left before we have to call it a day. But the question that we left before break was, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's looking to create the space to practice vulnerability?
Yeah. Consistency is very important. Consistency in behavior and how we show up and how we do things and how we say things and what we say things is very important, because consistency essentially is a stabilizer and really is safe, because, again, there's a predictability there. There's an element of predictability. Now, that doesn't mean you cannot change your mind or your ideas or your thoughts on certain subject matter. It just means how you express that comes from a calmer place. And so our body language, our posturing, the way we penetrate, particularly as men, the way we penetrate our environment, in other words, the way we show up in our personalities and our expressions, is very empowering and also very, very valuable for others perceiving us to be safe. If we're erratic and one moment we're angry and we get frustrated at the drop of a hat, or the drop of a pin, and then we're laughing, and then we're angry again, and we're sad. We're moving through these flux of emotions. We become unpredictable, and people generally we don't do too well with unpredictability unless you specifically expose yourself to that and train for it. I.e., a soldier as an example, or an elite athlete as an example, or an entrepreneur that also has some sense of personal development in his or her sphere of awareness, self improvement and so forth, where they can prepare for volatility. But most of us, we don't like that. We're a sentient being. We're an organism that thrives on stasis, on homeostasis. So consistency in how we show up is really important to help vulnerability come through and to welcome that as well. So we're actually having active, clear conversations around, hey, I welcome your honesty, and your honesty to me is more important than you pretending. And so getting clear on what those values are around in that dynamic, and just welcoming vulnerability, welcoming honesty, welcoming openness, welcoming transparency, and not judging that when that comes up, because we have an idea of how we want things to be. We have expectations which are rigid of how we want things to be, but allowing someone to truly be themselves and step into their gifts and step into their expression and honor that and know that. So these are conversations and almost rules of social engagement that take place prior to anything else even transpiring. So we become responsive as opposed to reactive. And again, I come back to consistency, because consistency builds trust, and trust, it allows openness, vulnerability, and transparency and freedom and expression to transpire.
That's brilliant. I love that. Before we move on, I want to make sure that we have enough time to share with everyone how they get a hold of you, how they can follow you, what kinds of things you've got coming up. So if you wouldn't mind sharing all that, and then whatever time we have left, let's go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram or Facebook, Stefanos Sifandos. My website is stefanossifandos.com, so stefanossifandos.com. There's a number of great events coming up at the moment for my European peeps. My beautiful fiance and I will be teaching a one-day workshop on the evolution of self-love, of loving others, essentially about love, and love connected to a higher source. But in addition as well, it's more than just that. It's about how do we be a more profound human being and make an impact in this world. And so that's London, and I believe that's October the 6th, if I'm accurate. And you can check out more information there on my beloved's website, christinehassler.com/London. That's christinehassler.com/London. We're very excited about that in October. And then I've got an amazing men's program. It's an 8-week online immersive journey. It's called Reclaim Your Kingdom. So literally reclaimyourkingdom.com. And that's for men looking to further empower themselves in this world. It's really all about masculinity in contemporary times, and how do we show up as men for ourselves, our children, our partners, our earth, our humanity, our colleagues, and just how do we become a more profound version of ourselves, gain confidence, gain clarity in our purpose, learn how to leave our legacy, understand our own sexuality. There's so much to this. It's a massive, massive journey, and it's a deeply empowering one as well. And so, maybe you, as a man, you want to get more control or mastery over your emotions, or maybe you've achieved a great deal in the business world, but you're disconnected in your relationship. So this program is very comprehensive, and it's my life's work. And that commences July 17th. So we've started intake for that now. We've already got some amazing men that have signed up. So that's reclaimyourkingdom.com.
Oh, that's going to be fantastic. And I think thinking about, you and Christine and the work that you're doing, I think we should have the both of you on, summer
Amazing.
to talk about that more and give people more, insight to what kind of work that you guys are doing together, because I think it's beautiful. Yeah. And we only have like 4 minutes, but one of the questions that I would love to ask you is, my whole practice is working toward living, life from a whole heart. What does living a wholehearted life mean to you?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, one that's ever evolving. Initially, it begins with being a witness and an observer to my own life and to my own happenings. How am I behaving? How am I showing up in the world? Are my thoughts that are conscious really aligned with my greatest truth? Am I treating others in the way that I want to treat them and they deserve to be treated, and that I would want to be treated as well? And what does that look like, and how do I want to be treated? And what do I want to focus on, my energy, my resources, my attention? And so having an awareness around that is very important. That's the beginning stages for me, being a witness and an observer to my inner world and my outer world, and deliberately doing that, which leads me to the next part, is in terms of how do I cultivate wholeness within my own life, is being very deliberate. In other words, being clear on what is important to me, aligning my actions with that clarity. That lays a foundation of meaning and fulfillment, which cultivates and breeds deep happiness, visceral happiness. And that, for me, that's a formula for wholeness. That's a formula for living an authentic life. And so wholeness is an ever-evolving game. It's attention I pay to my life every day, how I show up. And it's something that the Greeks spoke about, the Stoics spoke about, the Eastern mystics speak about, is about how attentive can you be to every facet an expression of your own life. And that's true consciousness when we're moving deliberately through the world.
That's a beautiful answer. I have to think about that, and I'll listen to it again on the recording. And we are recording it, and we'll get it out there on YouTube, and Stefanos is going to have a copy as well, and we'll get it out there for everyone. Dave, any questions that you can think of before we think about our last song?
No, I'm just thinking how Gracie's recovering if Stefanos isn't there. He could run the country. Sort the problems out in the mail department. Anyway, flipping it.
Well, I am so grateful for the space that we shared today.
As am I.
Thankful for you for coming on and getting up early and sharing this amazing time. And like I said, there were so many topics that we could have covered today, and so we'll definitely have to have you back and ask some more questions. And Dave, thanks for steering the ship. Appreciate it. And I apologize if there was any thunder or anything. It's like completely storming and thundering and lightning here, and I was a little bit nervous that everyone could hear it, but maybe not.
Thunder?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome.
Don't blame it on the weather if your stomach's rumbling because you're ready for your breakfast.
I am ready for breakfast.
Can you hear that?
It's time for breakfast.
That's thunder and lightning outside. My backside it is. It's you. You've not had your bran flakes yet. That's the problem.
It happens. Awesome. Well, our last song is Will Young, My Love, and we'll be back next week on Tuesday on The Heartbeat. And everyone have an amazing week.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thanks, guys.
you.
Thanks a lot for being on today, Stefanos.
Thank you, my friend.
Take care. Bye now.
You too.
Bye, everyone.